Okay, a very quick video on measuring the columns. So let's open up our 3D package. Click on the model browser here, scroll down to where the columns are in terms of the categories, and there they are. So I can either click see all my structural columns or click on the left hand side, the little plus icon, and to see what the two categories are. So let's maybe start with the 500 by 450. I think that's the majority of the columns. If I click them, the columns that were kind of on the side there have gone away. So I want to see first and foremost, when I do a bit of a takeoff, I actually click on one of the icons or one of the objects. So it doesn't matter which column in this category, they're all the same. They might have different dimensions, but they're pretty much all the same column. And on the right hand side here, in properties, just click what properties are available. Now you need to have clicked on one of the objects to see the properties here on the right hand side, and I can see that there's a name, there's a type name, and there's a bit of description there as well in terms of what it is, or C in situ concrete column. Scroll down here, and what I'm really looking for here is my dimensions. On my volume dimension, I have a B. If I zoom in, I'll be able to see what that is. The B is 500 millimeters, and that is, I guess, the length of the cross-sectional area of that column. And the H then, H I suppose is height, but I guess it depends on what way you're looking at it. And height may be or is this side. So B that side, H that side, and there's a width as well, which of course is the same as B. So you'll see multiple dimensions that may be actually the same dimension, and then a volume. What we don't have, and this is why I'm actually concentrating on looking at the columns, which we don't have, which we would get in the beams is, and sometimes this happens with columns, we don't have a length. So it makes it a little bit tricky that I don't have, or one of the dimensions is missing, and I will need that length. But of course, if you work backwards from the volume, if you get your cross-sectional area, B times H, and divide that area by a volume, you'll be left with what's missing, and that's essentially the length. So if we divide our area by our volume, we'll get the length of each one of those columns. So we've got to keep that in mind when we're doing some calculations, and that's why I'm using this one as an example. So clicking on one of those columns, or I don't have to particularly click on one of those columns. I can actually type in the name, but once I do, the name or the type name that's in the actual properties of the object, and in this case it's just called 500 by 450, comes up. It doesn't tell me a whole lot, does it? So I'm going to put in columns 500 by 450. Make sure that it's a BIM measurement on the right hand side here, and give it a fill color. So I suppose the first thing I'm really looking for in this context is the volume, and that's probably the most important dimension here. So volume, and that would be the volume of the concrete column. Put it into the structure classification. Now I know some of the columns, or maybe on the basement floor, would be in the substructure, but I'm going to lump them all into the structure, which is fine for the purposes of this project. And of course, the unit of measurement, if I'm measuring volume, I'll be measuring cubic meters. And in here goes a default formula, and this is essentially what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the volume as a calculation, and because I put volume in there, I have a mapping here for volume. So I'm going to type in volume. I want to make sure that one of the objects selected, and I see that there is a map available. How do I know there's a map available? Well, a little blue dot will come up there with a BIM property. So this one is essentially a map property. This one is a BIM property. And then if you want to see the successful map there, you can scroll down and see that volume is highlighted. And that particular one is 0.79. Okay, so remember what I said in that regard, in regards to mapping. I'm mapping a product to essentially a formula, I suppose, to an actual object property. A little bit different than what you're doing with 2D Takeoff, where you're creating dimensions. In this case, dimensions are already there, and I'm mapping to them. I'm kind of extrapolating, I guess. Next item is, sorry, not that one. The next item here is an additional output is plus, and I'm going to look for the length. Okay, there we go. Keep it in the same category, structure. Of course, in this case, it's going to be meters. And if there was a length object, BIM property of what I'm looking for, and I typed in length here, it would be available for me to select. And for the most case, if I was doing beams, that would be what I would do, or I would map to a cut length, which is more accurate. But in this case, I don't have the length, so I have to create a little formula here. What I do have is the volume, which I've already mapped to. And what I'm going to do is divide that volume, open brackets, by the BH objects, which is essentially my width, times my height. Now I'm using the word height there, even though it's not really the height of the column, it's the height of the cross-sectional area really. So volume times width times height. So the area, cross-sectional area divided by my volume will give me a resultant length. And once I put that formula in there, I'll have a width to map to, and I believe that is B from what we looked at previously, B, and then height to map to, and that is H. So if I wanted to see actually those dimensions, make sure they're mapped correctly, click the model properties here, and I can see that B is 500, and then H down here is 450. So that's the cross-sectional dimensions of my column. So B multiplied by H divided by volume will give me my length. And if I have the length, I'm going to click plus, I'll be able to calculate my formwork. So formwork, classification, capital cost structure, meters squared. So I'm looking for the surface area of the perimeter, I guess, of my column. So this surface, and then of course the other two sides, the corresponding surfaces on the other two sides. So at this stage now, you're in fourth year, it's the perimeter of your column, which is this side, this side, this side, this times its length. So I guess we have to calculate a perimeter first. Now we have mapped the width and we have mapped the height as such, which we've mapped those kind of cross-sectional dimensions. So width times 2 for both sides, and put brackets to enclose that as the first calc. And then I'm going to add it to, I guess, open brackets, the height dimension times 2. So what that'll do is it'll calculate 2 times B, which is, what is it, for 500, and then 2 times H, which is 450, and then I'm going to close brackets around once it does those calculations. So brackets basically give an indication to the formula which you do first. Obviously the inside brackets gets done first, does a calculation, and then encloses it and calculates it on the outside brackets. Okay, so that's going to give us our perimeter. Now we want to multiply that by obviously the length, but we don't have a length because we couldn't map to it. So we need to use the formula we used before. So if we go back to my length formula, take that out there, I might just copy, Control C, go back into my formwork and multiply that, paste it in there. So it's essentially my perimeter multiplied by my length, which is my volume, divided by my width times height, and all that stuff has been mapped. There's nothing in here that isn't in here. So volume, height, and width. And that is probably one of the most difficult little calculations. If you didn't really have the experience in doing those, you wouldn't kind of get that. But those that are good at maths and kind of know how to use those formulas, that'll probably be no issue for you. But that's probably one of the most difficult calculations in the BIM, I guess, in the BIM takeoff. So the last one is the rebar, and this is actually one of the easier ones because I do have a volume. So I click substructure. I'm looking for the weight, and it gives me a default formula of length times weight by length, but that's actually not what I'm looking for. It's volume times weight by volume, because I'm actually looking for a rebar quantity, which I don't have. So I'm going to extrapolate a quantity based on a kg per meter cubed. Now, what is the kg per meter cubed? I have the Excel spreadsheet open here. If I go into my template, scroll down to structure, rebar, I can see there my columns is 300 kg per meter cubed. So I go back into my model here and I just type in 300. Now, unfortunately, I don't have anything in the model properties that will map to 300 because it just doesn't give it to me. So I'm going to type it in. So that's the only thing I have to type in. And then I think I'm ready to take my to do my takeoff. So just to double check before I do, volume map to volume, length extrapolated from the volume based on the cross-sectional area, formwork, a bit of a long-winded calc there in terms of getting the perimeter multiplied by the length, and then my rebar, quite simply volume times weight by volume, and then type in the weight by volume. So I want to make sure that the categories that I'm taking off, the 500 by 450, that's the category I have open. Otherwise, you'll be maybe calculating and adding things in that don't necessarily need to be. So not clicking on rectangle, concrete rectangular, because it'll add in that 450 by 450 into this calculation. But no, just the 500 by 450. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Start Takeoff. And in fact, actually, as I've already selected one there because I was using it to access my model properties, it wants to add it in there as correct. Okay. Now, I can't do it in these individually. You'll notice that once I start clicking on them, there we go, they get added. There's 3 there measured. but that is pretty long-winded, isn't it? So I am going to click select down here, selection icon. It can't double measure what I've already measured, so I'm going to draw um, a rectangle around this. How do I do that? Well, I hold down my left button on my mouse and I keep holding it and I go diagonally and I release. And now I've selected all those icons. So there's 296. In fact, there's 299, but I've three already measured because I clicked three, click correct. So those three I'd already measured don't get double measured, which is great, because other software you could make that mistake. So 299 columns, volume 251.67, I have a total length of 1118, or close to 119. Formwork, rebar, quite a lot of rebar, so hopefully that's correct. And then what I might do is to calculate and to measure the 450 by 450 columns, little three dots, hopefully getting used to this by now, duplicate, 450 by 450, okay, different fill, let's give it a completely different color, and everything else can stay the same because there's nothing in my maps that I've typed in as a kind of a number from 450 to 450. It'll pull based on B and H, the particular object properties. And then I can start my takeoff. And then obviously I need to navigate to those 450 by 450 columns. So there they are, and they're not taken off. As I said, you can individually click them and click correct, or I can draw around them. Now I've got 63 highlighted, but make sure you do click the little correct button. So I get students going, where is it gone? No, I didn't. Okay, well, highlight them, click correct. So there we have both my columns. If you want to see them together, concrete rectangular columns, green and red or green and pink, with those proper quantities. And hopefully I got that right there. If you notice something wrong in the video, by all means, send it to me. But my concrete columns, I'll probably add those two quantities together, the 39.22 and the 251.67, and that'll get in there as a kind of, I suppose, a populated meter cubed. Again, it depends on this template, whether it's less than or greater than a cross-sectional area 0.1. I can imagine it'll all be in here because our cross-sectional area is more than 0.1. It'll be up to you to double check that, but that is just a little video on the columns. And as I said, I'm posting little videos, and I'll have another one hopefully sometime soon.